Chapter 8. And so Mother stayed in the dining room in her bed where the big oak table had been, and lay with her mouth open, breathing loudly. We sat with her and focused our attention on being with her. As we stroked her head, we thought, it is only a matter of time now, and we did not know what else we could do. My brothers sat with her and put their large hands on her head and spoke to her quietly. Mother's mouth was open day and night, breathing noisily, the air drying her lips to her teeth and making her tongue rough and hard. I put water on my fingers and gently rubbed her gums to make them wet, and Alexia cleaned her teeth with a soft baby toothbrush. Someone gave us lemon and glycerin swabs, like large cotton buds that would moisten her mouth if applied with care. I had heard that the lemon and the glycerin would make the dryness worse, and I would not use them, until I saw that Alexia had simply put them in a bowl of clean water and was using them to apply water to the whole of Mum's mouth. "Look," said Alexia, "if I put a toothbrush into Grandma's mouth to clean her tongue, she bites the brush." I thought, I must be careful not to use my fingers to moisten her tongue any more. Mother did not move. Alexia and I turned her properly, washed her, and changed her sheets just once, at the beginning of the lying still and breathing loudly through her mouth. But she managed to cry out with the pain, and so we didn't turn her like that again. We tried instead to adjust her position with pillows every few hours. Alexia was afraid of pressure sores, worried at how quickly Mum's skin could break down. After a while, we stopped sitting with her and focusing on her. We sat around her bed and chatted instead. We popped in and kissed her bony hot head and left again. We carried on around her as if she had always been lying still in her hospital bed in the dining room where we used to have huge meals on the table that was there until her bed came and took over. Sometimes in her conservatory, my brothers and Alexia and I would pause in our eating and talking to check we could still hear her breathing. "It's only days now," we said to each other, and went about our business. It seemed to have been only days for weeks. On the 6th day of her lying and breathing, Alexia and I bought a film to watch to give ourselves a treat. She won't die, I thought, and if she does, it doesn't matter if we're there or not. But I whispered in her ear that day not to go without me. "Let me know," I said. "Don't do it alone." After the film, not long after midnight, we heard some dogs baying in the distance. "Wouldn't it be alarming," I said, "if Grandma called us? If she called our names from downstairs?" I felt uneasy. About half an hour later, we heard an extraordinary noise from downstairs, a sound like an explosion of air, a sharp retort, a call. Alexia and I knew it was Mother, and that she was calling us, and that this was not like any other time that she had needed us. I was suddenly very afraid. In a split second, I thought, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I don't know what to do. We ran downstairs to Mum. As I approached her bed, she seemed to have stopped breathing. "She is gone," I said to Alexia as we took our places on either side of her bed. We had placed 2 chairs there 6 days ago in readiness. "This is it," we said to each other. "This is it." She drew a long breath in, and we thought, we are not too late. She has called us. One of us opened both the windows and the curtains behind her bed. The moon shone white and bright and strong into the front garden and onto her head. It was like the dream where the light was shining down from above onto her head as she turned her face into it. I placed one hand on her chest over her heart to show her that I knew her life and her heart would stop soon. I wanted her to know that right up until death took her breath away forever, I was not afraid now. I was part of the journey, and that I would not leave her. My other hand stroked the top of her head. Alexia held her hands and stroked her arms. "Let's pray," she said. "Grandma would like that." And so we did. We prayed over and over the same prayer we knew she liked, and watched her as breaths came slower and quieter. I leaned close to her on her pillow. "Mama," I said, "thank you for my life." I told her that all the love that she had brought into the world through her children and grandchildren was coming back to her now. "Go when you are ready," I said. "We are all fine here. All is good here. Do what you have to do and go when you are ready." I told her how much I loved her. We loved her, and we began to pray again. Her mouth moved slightly, as if she were trying to pray with us. She took a tiny breath in, let a tiny breath out, and died. Under my hand on her chest, her heart stopped. "She is gone," I said, and Alexia and I looked at each other. I let out a little cry. It came out without my knowing or thinking. It came from my stomach. It came from somewhere there should not have been a sound. It came from my soul. Alexia stroked her grandmother's arms and was silent. We put the kettle on and made some tea. Then I called for someone to come and certify her death. Suddenly, around us, all the pipes in the house started to rattle and to shake. There was so much noise. I couldn't see where it was coming from. The sounds were as if all that was tight in the house had become loose and was shaking with the release of tension. "I hear footsteps upstairs," said Alexia. "It's Grandma," she said. "She's packing for heaven." The nurses who came to certify her death were lovely. We wanted it certified as soon as possible, so that we could begin to wash and lay her out and just be together. By 2 a.m. it was all done and the nurses gone. Alexia and I lit the candles, put the kettle on again, put her favourite big band music on, and filled a bowl with water. We fetched her best nightie, we fetched her brush, and we fetched clean white towels. We made more tea. "Let's put her favourite soap in the water," said Alexia, and so we did. We washed her in lavender soap from her bathroom. "Let's find her perfume," I said, and so we did. We found L'air du Temps upstairs, the perfume I had brought her back from Paris when I was married many years ago, which she wore and loved. We applied it to behind her ears, on her wrist, and on her chest. For the rest of the night, after she had been washed and brushed and made beautiful, and after I had placed flowers on her pillow after Steve's flowers on his pillow, and a single long-stemmed rose in her hands on her chest, we sat and talked and remembered, and wondered how we had come so suddenly to this point. I had called my brothers just after she had died, and the word began to spread. Alexia and I went to bed as the sun came up, and slept for an hour before going downstairs again to start the rest of our lives without her. During the night, downstairs, Mother's mouth had closed. Her skin had become white, and her body had settled into itself. She was not completely cold. The rose had wilted on her chest, so I changed it to another fresh flower from a vase by the bed. This was it. Mother was definitely dead. She really looked it in the morning. It felt odd not to cover her with a blanket to keep her warm. The house was peaceful and oddly unchanged. Mother had died at 10 minutes past 1 in the morning, and we had been up all night. When the undertakers came, they were kind and gentle and professional. They came in their black suits and their big van, and they did not wear blue plastic gloves. When they picked Mum up and put her into the body bag, they did so with their hands, and I was so grateful. Thank you, I thought. Thank you. Over the next few days, I got the death certificates, started the paperwork, and cleaned the house. I had the bed, the commode, and all the medical paraphernalia removed, and I placed a jam jar with lace around it, full of little white flowers, on the floor over the place where she had died. And on that night that Mum died, her neighbour and friend here looked out at that bright white moon at the moment she died and knew she had gone. I just knew, he said. I just knew. A week later, the house is quiet and kind. There is no great loss, no deep sorrow. There is peace and the feeling of rightness. I feel no need to cry. I don't feel grief. I feel love, honour, respect, and peace. Mother is so totally gone. There is only heaven for her now, and that is where I think she has gone. I am staying on in her house until after the funeral. Then I will go back to my house. Alexia woke this week after a dream in the daytime as she was resting before her night duty. Grandma came in to see her and sat by her bed. It was very real. Her hair was the lovely white Mr. Whippy hair that she had before cutting it to be comfortable in her illness. She was wearing the nightie we put her in after we laid her out. Grandma was happy, and her eyes were sparkling and full of joy. She told Alexia that she was fine and happy. "Are you in heaven?" asked Alexia, and she said that she was. Heaven, she said, was being bathed in a whirlpool of prayers. "Keep praying," she said. "Every prayer is heard and never lost." "Are you with God?" Alexia asked her. "Yes," she replied. They talked and chatted for a while before Grandma got up and left. The last thing Grandma said to Alexia was to remember her younger brother, who in Australia will miss her funeral and be very sad. The day before the funeral, Mother came home in her coffin for her friends and neighbours to say goodbye. One of my brothers was alarmed in case I provided alcohol with the cakes and tea, and that everyone would become tipsy, tear-filled and maudlin. I wanted to have this wake from the moment we knew Mother would die. When I mentioned it to her after she was first ill, she was slightly taken aback, but didn't object. I could not have organised it without the agreement of all three of my brothers, and so, with their agreement, Mum came home to lie in state. I cleaned the house like a mad thing the day before, and polished the big oak dining table on which we were to put the coffin. I thought, if she comes back and doesn't smell furniture polish, she won't be happy at all. There was no alcohol, just tea, cake, and sandwiches. There would be no crying into the whiskey and falling asleep in Mother's nice chairs. 2 of Mum's dearest friends provided cake and sandwiches, and only one of them came for the day. "I have already said goodbye," the other said, "a few days before she died. She opened her eyes. She said my name. She knew me," said Mother's friend. The hearse arrived at midday. Mother was carried through the garden, round the house, and in through the big French windows, past the table in the conservatory where she used to love and sit and watch the horses in the fields and the sky changing over the shimmings, the table now laden with cake and sandwiches, and into the dining room where the big shining oak table had replaced the hospital bed. We placed the coffin on the table over the place where she had died in her bed 10 days ago. I knew the undertakers would not have taken off the coffin lid if she had looked gruesome, but I still asked for reassurance. She had by now been dead for nearly 2 weeks. I crossed my fingers as they removed the lid. She was fine, just odd. Her nose had fallen into itself. Her eyes had sunk. The line between her lips was too long, and her lips had disappeared. Her hair had been brushed down over her forehead, so I found a brush and brushed it back. She would have been pleased with that. She hated fringes, and was forever trying to push mine back, to show my lovely forehead, she would say. I showed her lovely forehead now, and something of her image returned to this strange, white, familiar, yet not quite recognisable person lying amongst the satin and pillows in the lovely cotton nightie with the roses around the neck that Alexia and I had put on her after she had died, when we laid her out that long, candlelit, sad and wonderful night. Her skin was cold and hard. It was difficult to touch her. Just 2 weeks ago I was writing of how soft and hot her skin was when I kissed her cheeks. This was my mother. It was just that the light had gone out. She was here, but not here. She couldn't smell the furniture polish. She didn't know that her hair had been brushed back. She was long gone. Her hands, though, her hands were still the same, and I found myself telling people to look at her hands if they couldn't see Mum in her face. There was something of Joan Rivers about her face, and she smelt gently and curiously of herbs. My grandmother, Mother's mother, lay for a while in her bed too, by the piano in our house in Surrey after she died, so that her family could travel from Ireland, Birmingham, and anywhere else they were living to say goodbye, and the house was filled with people coming and going all day and all night. My father took my youngest brothers in to say goodbye. I would not do it. I was afraid to see my grandma now she had died. One by one, my brothers kissed our grandmother on her forehead and said goodbye. John, then aged 9, remembers that she was stone cold. "She is cold because she is dead," said 8-year-old Dominic, tapping her on the forehead. "There is nothing here because she has gone." I did not need to tap my mother's forehead, now that her hair had been brushed back from it, to know that she is gone. She went the moment her heart stopped beating, and she made the house shake while she packed her bags for heaven. The funeral men provided a purple pall to cover the coffin so that those who didn't want to see Mum didn't have to. Only one person didn't want to see her. Everyone else did. My youngest son, Dmitri, had come to help. He removed and replaced the purple pall for each of the visitors and placed chairs for people to sit. He is 6'7" tall and towered over everyone and the coffin, looking unforgettable. He loved his grandmother a great deal and took this saying goodbye to her very seriously. Alexia and I had placed jam jars with lace ribbons around them and small candles lit inside alongside the whole length of the coffin on both sides. The jam jars were from Alexia's wedding a few months ago in March. It looked lovely. We made sure not to set fire to the pole or to Dimitri's sleeves as he pulled it back and replaced it during the day. Mother's friends and neighbours arrived, some with walking sticks, some with flowers, some with tears. Her contemporaries had aged with her over the years, and I saw friends who had been younger than I am now when I first met them, old now themselves, coming for the last time into her house for the final day here. "Goodbye," they said to her when Dimitri removed the purple covering. "I'll see you soon." "Oh, wait for me," one of her friends said through her tears. "It won't be long now." The house filled with young people in their 70s to old people in their 90s. I was moved by their acceptance of death in the house and death in their own lives. "We are old," they said next door in the conservatory as we served them tea and cake. "This is what will come to us soon, and we are ready for it." Each of the people that came to see Mum had lives that stretched back far into the past, and at some point in that past they and Mother had met. They would all have been younger then, younger than I am now, this day of Mother's wake in a coffin on her dining table with her strange long mouth and brushed back hair. This day would never have crossed their minds. They had so much time ahead of them then, and so much life to live, and yet death came and passed for Mum, and all of her friends that came to say goodbye still had to wait for their time. "I buried my son this year," one of Mother's friends said to me as he was leaving. "I remembered him from my youth, and I remembered his son, a man of my age. In his 90s now, this old friend was much changed. Your mother," he said, "made a point of being silent for me in the church when she did the flowers, when I was there polishing the brass. I could always talk to her, and she gave me such kindness." "Your mother," these friends told me, "made us so welcome. She was wise and calm. She listened to us without fail, asked after our families, remembering all the names and histories. We turned to her when we needed support. We turned to her when we needed help. She was always there for us. Oh," they said, "she made us feel as if we were the only people in the room. We loved her. We cannot imagine her gentle, loving, kind, and deeply spiritual presence will no longer be in our lives. How can you live without her? How can we?" I remember my mother with love, but I did not know this person they described. I fought with her all my life and ran as far away from her as I could. But I could see that perhaps she was like this, and that I had not wanted it from her. I felt exposed and vulnerable while growing up in the 1960s and 70s. If she knew too much, if I didn't protect myself, she could be very cruel. She had suffered terribly with depression, and at times I hated her and her anger. Later, now, I am, consumed with regret and pain that no one looked after her, no one recognized it, no one saved her. Now, if it happened now, if Mother was suffering in that way now, there would be treatments for her. We would have a name for it. We would know what to do and how not to be scarred by it. Someone would be able to make it better. My father eventually left my mother, and for the rest of her life, she relived that abandonment as she saw it, over and over again. If there is such a thing as a soul wound, my mother's soul wound was abandonment. Mum was always so beautiful. She was deeply religious, and more, she was spiritual. She was insightful, intelligent, and full of contradictions. She seemed to find it hard to like herself. And yet, she knew how to be wise, charismatic, strong-willed, and if you didn't stop her, very controlling. People loved her. Oh, how she was loved! Fearless, practical, witty, shrewd, and without boundaries, she didn't take no for an answer. I disappointed her terribly. I was willful, difficult, remote, strange, and artistic. I was also very like my father, as she would so often tell me, which added to her anger. In my late teens and early 20s at university, I had bright pink hair, which horrified her, and I was not allowed home. I made dreadful decisions. I was everything that she had hoped that I would not be, and I didn't care, except that I did care. I longed for her to love me and see who I was. And when my children were young and I was raising them alone, she was everything as a grandmother that she could not be as a mother. She was wonderful. By the time she was in her 80s and I in my 50s, we had made our peace together and become close and loving friends. I still kept my distance and I watched her closely, but over the last few years I had some of the loveliest moments of my life with her. The darkness was still there, but I became better at dealing with it and stepping aside so it did not threaten any more to extinguish me. At 4 in the afternoon of the wake, the hearse returned to collect Mum. I took the undertakers into the conservatory to have cake. They were very formally dressed in black and had come for my dead mother. People hadn't finished saying goodbye, and so they joined her friends for tea and cake until there was room next door to go in and nail down the coffin lid. The whole thing was slightly bizarre. The whole day had been very unusual, though perfectly acceptable, and to feed the coffin carriers tea and cake while they waited to take Mother away forever seemed the right thing to do. I liked these two men. They had both come to collect Mum the day after she had died, and touched my heart by holding Mum with their hands, handling her with care and respect, and not wearing blue gloves. Mother left us forever then. People making space for the coffin to come out through the garden, round the side of the house, and into the hearse. I stood and watched her go. One of the men walked in front of the car, the other drove it, all of 5 minutes' drive to the church where she was to rest overnight, ready for the funeral tomorrow. It was her wish to spend the night before her funeral in the church that had given her so much to live for, so much comfort, strength and support. I went back in to put the kettle on. Most of the friends had gone with her to the church for the service of vigil, but I needed to stop. Tomorrow was another big day. After everyone had left the house, I needed to walk through the rooms and test my strength. How am I? Mother has gone for good. How am I? Will I sleep tonight? Is there something of her still here? Was this the right thing to do? There was nothing of her spirit in the house. She left when she died. Nothing. No whisper, no presence, no mother. Silence. The house was silent, and it was strong. It was not empty. I didn't know that until some days after the funeral when I went back, and the sense of emptiness was different. After the hearse took Mother to the church, the house was still holding us all in its heart. She was still there, but I couldn't locate her. I couldn't feel her. It was only later, when I felt the silence and emptiness, that I thought that how after she had gone to the church in her coffin, some of her energy must have remained to see us all through.